Hello everybody and welcome to Star Wars on High. Thank you for stopping by. So there's more fake rumors going around again about how George Lucas is going to buy Star Wars back from Disney, which is completely false like always. But I've also been seeing more and more threads about George's original concept for the sequel trilogy, and I wanted to go over that today and try to paint a picture as to what it could have been. It's definitely not what I expected. And to start, all of this comes from the wonderful Star Wars Archives book written by Paul Duncan. The Star Wars Archives is a two-volume set based on interviews the author did with George Lucas and others who worked on the original 6 films. I can't recommend them enough. They are a perfect insight into what went into the making of these movies. Now, I'd wait for them to go on some kind of sale because they usually run about $200 each, but they are massive books, so I think it's worth the price, but I understand it's a little steep for a book. But getting into it, the story would have revolved around Luke rebuilding the Jedi Order from scraps, with a few surviving Jedi that resurfaced, Leia trying to bring the New Republic into order, and a group of underworld gangsters all being brought together under the rule of the one and only Darth Maul and his apprentice Darth Talon. Here's the full quote from the end of the book, starting with the conversation between Paul and George. So this starts off after a conversation revolving around clone troopers going into stormtroopers when Paul Duncan asks, "Did you have a different idea of what they were?" George says, "Yeah. They started out as clones. Once all the clones were killed, the Empire picked up recruits like militia. They fought, but they weren't very good at what they did." Paul continues, "That's why they kept missing." George agrees. "That's why they kept missing. Then after the Rebels won, there were no more stormtroopers in my version of the third trilogy. I had planned for the first trilogy to be about the father, the second trilogy to be about the son, and the third trilogy to be about the daughter and the grandchildren. Episodes 7, 8, and 9 would take ideas from what happened after the Iraq War. Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody, now what are you going to do? Rebuilding afterwards is harder than starting a rebellion or fighting the war. When you win the war and you disband the opposing army, what do? The stormtroopers would be like Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist fighters that joined ISIS and kept on fighting. The stormtroopers refuse to give up when the Republic win. They want to be stormtroopers forever, so they go to a far corner of the galaxy, start their own country, and their own rebellion. There's a power vacuum, so gangsters like the Hutts are taking advantage of the situation, and there is chaos. The key person is Darth Maul, who had been resurrected in the Clone Wars cartoons. He brings all the gangs together." Paul Duncan jumps back in. "Was Darth Maul the main villain?" And George continues, "Yeah, but he's very old, and we have 2 versions of him. One is with a set of cybernetic legs like a spider, and then later he has metal legs and he was a little bit bigger, more of a superhero. We did all this in the animated series. He was in a bunch of episodes." Darth Maul trained a girl, Darth Talon, who was in the comic books as his apprentice. She was the new Darth Vader, and most of the action was with her. So these were the 2 main villains of the trilogy. Maul eventually becomes the godfather of crime in the universe because as the Empire falls, he takes over. The movies are about how Leia, who else is going to be the leader, is trying to build the Republic. They still have the apparatus of the Republic, but they have to get it under control from the gangsters. That was the main story. It starts out a few years after Return of the Jedi, and we establish pretty quickly that there's this underworld. There are these offshoot stormtroopers who started their own planets, and that Luke is trying to restart the Jedi. He puts the word out, so out of 100,000 Jedi, maybe 50 or 100 are left. The Jedi have to grow again from scratch, so Luke has to find 2- and 3-year-olds and train them. It'll be 20 years before you have a new generation of Jedi. By the end of the trilogy, Luke would have rebuilt much of the Jedi, and we would have the renewal of the New Republic, with Leia, Senator Organa, becoming the Supreme Chancellor in charge of everything, so she ended up being the chosen one. Now, however you feel about it, I think this would have been a very strange way to go about the sequels. I think the big glaring problems that a lot of Legends fans would agree with is that this trilogy would completely erase the Heir to the Empire trilogy, as it would definitely overlap where that story takes place and would throw a lot of the EU out of order. But as far as the story itself, I get that Darth Maul is a fan favorite, and I loved seeing what he did during the time of the Clone Wars and his time during the Empire, but I don't know if bringing him back would have been such a good choice. The one thing I dislike the most is the idea of using Darth Talon. Darth Talon was a Sith from the Star Wars Legacy comic series, but that series took place about 150 to 170 years after Return of the Jedi, so I don't think I have to explain how that would cause some problems. The other big thing that would have thrown people through a loop was the bit about Leia being the chosen one. Now, George Lucas has said in multiple interviews that Anakin is the chosen one, so seeing him say that it would be Leia instead is super interesting to me. Just goes to show that as the creator, you are free to change your mind about things as you see fit. But really, in this trilogy, Leia becoming the Supreme Chancellor of the New Republic would be the perfect example of her being the chosen one, finally bringing the Republic together and wiping out evil once and for all, bringing balance to the Force and the galaxy as the chosen one is meant to do. I think if anything is clear between every version that continues after Return of the Jedi, it's that Luke would restart the Jedi Order. It happened in Legends, canon, and this version as well. And again, we see that George even admits that around 50 to 100 Jedi survived Order 66, so I don't think all these new Jedi popping up is that hard to believe. Overall, I think there is some interesting story arcs that could have come from this trilogy, but I don't think it would have done as well, especially since this would also focus heavily on midichlorians and the science behind it. But like always, it's completely up to the viewer to decide that. So what are your thoughts? Does this idea for George's sequel trilogy make your head spin, or do you think it would have worked? Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, thank you to everyone who stuck around to this point in the video, and we hope to see you again very soon.